Welcome back to the 27th rendition of the Green Line Gazette podcast. We are back kicking off a new season. We were all in on the World Cup. Unfortunately, that road ended in a very brutal way. Go watch episode 26 if you want to hear about that. But we are full force on Boston College sports. Kind of what the podcast was originally intended to be. It was just found at an odd time where there weren't too many BC sports happening. So now we enter back into the fall heading up. We'll have everything football, hockey, basketball, you name it. We're going to be on it. Today, really bad news. It seems like the season has already gone wrong for Boston College football as Chudzinski has torn his Achilles and will miss the entire season. We'll also be talking about Mason McKenzie in the quarterback battle, which was a point of contention last year in BC's 2-10 disaster class of a season. But before we get into that, just remember we're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Substack. So without further ado, we'll get right into this devastating Chudzinski injury. Torn Achilles, gonna miss the whole season, which is just absolutely, brutal. This is, Kalen was probably one of our few bright spots on the roster, especially on the offense last season. Absolutely just a great young player. His freshman year last year, he was named to the 2025 All-Freshman National Team by The Athletic, by PFF, and On3. This year, he was named to the Athlon Sports preseason All-ACC second team. In a conference that is as deep as the ACC with tight end play, to be a sophomore ending up on the second team is quite the accolade to have. And of course, he was a national statistic leader last year. He led all freshman tight ends across the entire country in receptions and receiving yards, while tying the lead for touchdown catches among freshmen. Of course, he had 24 receptions, 313 receiving yards, and 4 touchdown catches. You can say that's not great on the face value, but for a true freshman tight end, that is absolutely, I think insane production. And it was only going to get better until, of course, he tears his Achilles. I have no clue, shout out to my friend Zach who brought this up, what's going on at BC football practices, if they're doing like hand-to-hand combat and like wrestling, because I swear we have just devastating injury after devastating injury occurring at practice and not in games. And now we're missing, our tight end one for the entire season, and it's only July. And we're, about a month and a half or a month and a week away from the first official kickoff, and we are already down one of our more important assets. So what's going on at practice or in the weight room or whatever it may be is just starting to become a glaring issue, I would say. There's nothing you can do about it now. Achilles is already torn. The season's over. It's going to be a devastating loss, but it definitely raises questions and perhaps speculation into what's going on behind the scenes. On the silver lining here, though, is O'Brien was quoted saying that rehab is, going well and he's attacking it well and should be back in January of 2027. So, obviously not here for the season, but he's going to get that medical redshirt year probably, and then get 3 more years, hopefully, at Boston College, where he's probably going to get better every single year. Not only is this, like I said, horrible for Kalen himself, it's obviously really bad, but as for just, BC's offense, right? Whoever we start at quarterback, and it'll probably be McKenzie, but we can get to that in a minute. You're taking away, regardless of who it is, a young quarterback security blanket. For an offense that was as shaky as it was last year and is now going through a quarterback transition, having a guy like a tight end one who's reliable, who he's going to get his hands on the ball, is just a huge security blanket for, inexperienced or younger QBs in the ACC. Especially just the way he dominates and commands that middle of the field. He's always getting open, finding gaps between backers and safeties and what have you. So really bad for, kind of like the safety valve of the team to be gone. O'Brien's scheme, if you've watched a lot of Bill O'Brien football, which I'm sure a lot of us have, being Patriots fans and, BC college football fans in general, he loves to use tight ends heavily in the passing game and just in general. Chudzinski was also a great run blocker, and he did exactly that. And O'Brien loves his tight ends. He was probably like Bob's ideal, player, and now he is also out for the season. So very, very, very frustrating. We can leave it at that for now. As for what happens next at this position, it's not great. Um, so our backups now, right, looking through the depth chart and looking who has played before, you have senior Zeke Moore and junior Cameron Kosman. Moore had also played a fullback role as well. Came from FAU about 2 years ago, I think in the spring of 2025. Him and Kosman will probably shoulder the traditional tight end workload. I think they have the knowledge of the playbook and just your typical institutional knowledge, but they definitely lack the explosive kind of field stretching playmaking ability that Chudzinski had put on tape last year and had showed those flashes of. So I think Moore and Kosman will be serviceable, but I just don't think you're going to get that bang bang production out of a tight end one like you would have had with Chudzinski, which is, again, a huge blow just because of, how rocky our receiver group can be now that Bond is gone. I guess Skeet will be back, but you really wanted that tight end, and I think Moore and Kosman will do fine. I'm not slanting them in any way. I just don't think they would be as good and will produce as much as Chudzinski would have, which really hurts. You can also look to this wild card I was reading up, I think on 24/7 on Bryce Lewis. So O'Brien moved Lewis to defensive. I think it was a left end, maybe right end, probably both, from tight end. Right, this dude is 6'7", just an absolute freak athlete. He played tight end in high school, came to BC basically as a tight end before getting moved to defensive end. He's the son of our former DC, Tim Lewis. I would not be shocked if you see Bill O'Brien utilize Bryce Lewis in the red zone, right? He's not going to bring him out for midfield sets or what have you, but if you're a 10 and in or a 5 and in situation in the red zone, he is just a massive target. He is so athletic, right? You throw a fade, you throw a jump ball to him, a slant, whatever, he's probably going to power through that. So again, right, of course, there was a reason he was moved to defensive end. It's probably because he wasn't a D1 level tight end, I guess, on the face value. But who knows, right? You kind of got to do anything you can at this point without Chudzinski. So don't be shocked if you see now defensive end Bryce Lewis going up for 50-50 balls or jump fades, whatever it may be, in the red zone, because he might be a very valuable asset. He probably wasn't going to see any playing time if Chudzinski didn't go down, because you probably have guys like Moore and Kosman coming instead. But now, right, you got to do what you got to do. Expect Lewis. As for the rest of the depth, off the top of my head, I'm thinking like DJ Johnson, Brady Clough, Danny Edgehill. They'll be in the rotation, I'm sure, maybe in blocking sets. But now I think O'Brien's going to have to shift his approach to kind of multi-receiver set, or maybe even using Lewis as kind of a run blocking tight end just because of his frame and whatnot. But again, not much to say, right? Who knows? We're speculating. It's July 17th, right? Kickoff's a month and however many days away. Who knows what it's really going to look like in a game? But I just had to come on here and just talk. Like, this is just a devastating loss and breaks my heart, because I think he was just gonna be so much better this year, and he will continue to be, hopefully, when he comes back from this Achilles injury. But I mean, he was primed to have another just breakout season, again, named to the second team ACC in the preseason. So the hype and the expectations were there, but for now, right, we can't do anything about it besides move on. So I guess we can talk about this quarterback battle, which, as the days go on, it sounds less of a battle and more like O'Brien has found his guy. Who would be the D2 transfer from Saginaw Valley State, Mason McKenzie, was sent to the ACC Kickoff event that took place, I want to say, last weekend. Let's see, ACC Kickoff. I think it was like we sent like KP Price. Yeah, here it is. Okay, KP Price, Anthony Polano, and Mason McKenzie were the three guys O'Brien sent to the ACC Kickoff, which is basically just kind of like a media day and a hype up day for the ACC. You're obviously going to be sending guys to that are going to be, key players. And the fact that he sent McKenzie there kind of means this is going to be our starting guy now. If you want to look at, kind of who he was competing with, you could say Femi Babaloa. He's just returning depth, probably our third string, not going to do much. But the former 4-star recruit from Arkansas, Grayson Wilson, never saw field time at Arkansas, but he's got a big frame, pro style kind of build, SEC room pedigree and training background, which can be attractive. I see why we brought him in, but for now, it kind of looks like McKenzie's going to be our guy. I can read you some of McKenzie's stats because he was absolutely tearing it up. In the, I want to say, what conference is that? I think it's the GLIAC or the GLAC. No, it's the GLIAC. Yeah. All right. So if you just want to look, we'll go through this dude's stats because they're kind of absolutely insane. So before we go through, right, this was the GLIAC, the GLAC, I guess we'll call it, Player of the Year last year. He was first team All GLAC. He was a 2024 GLAC Freshman of the Year and GLAC Honorable Mention that same freshman year. So this guy has been putting up stats. If we look to, we'll start in 2024, 11 games, 55 completion percentage with 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 2,000 passing yards. Played pretty well. And then, of course, last year he just really ups it up. About a 60% completion percentage, 2.1K yards, 17 tutties, 11 interceptions. So he finishes, and then he had a freshman year, I guess, where he played 3 games, but he got, I think, a medical redshirt there. Didn't do much, but he finished his career at Saginaw Valley with 4,300 yards, 31 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. But that's not even the best part because this guy is a mobile threat, and I think that's what BC really needs. You need a guy kind of like, I guess, Tommy Castellanos was, right, who can move on his feet. So that 2024 true freshman season, he had 117 carries for 662 yards. His longest was 89. He had 6 rushing touchdowns. Last year, he had 141 carries with 942 rushing yards, long of 41 and 10 rushing touchdowns, finishing his career with 1.7K rushing yards and then 18 rushing touchdowns because he had 2 that freshman year. He is an absolute threat on his feet, and I think BC needs that 3-dimensional quarterback type of player who can really be a threat outside of the pocket. Defenses are going to have to respect his scrambling ability. And as you can see, he is not afraid to run it. He had 278 career rush attempts in his Saginaw Valley playing days. This dude will leave the pocket and make you pay. And he's a pretty good passer on top of that. So I am very excited with the direction O'Brien is going here. Right, you kind of, people compare him like it's this Boston College's Trinidad Chambliss-esque player. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but Chambliss had similar stats, especially being, an above average passer, but not a great passer by any means, and a really big threat on the ground. And Mason McKenzie seems to be doing exactly that. There are lots of concerns with McKenzie's jump from from D3 to from D2 to Power 4, right? That's a huge leap to go from D2 to the ACC. O'Brien's got his faith in him. He's his number one guy, but right, competition's competition, right? You can put all the confidence you want in somebody. The defenses that you are going to be seeing against Notre Dame this year, against Virginia Tech under James Franklin now, are just going to be that much bigger, that much more physical, and that much scarier than they were in the GLIAC. So, will that be a problem? I don't think it will. I think there will be growing pains, which hopefully he will get out by the first couple of weeks. No doubt about that. You don't expect a seamless transition here. I think that would be a little naive, but I don't think it's going to be something that plagues him or the team for the season. I think by game 2, game 3, he's probably going to get his stride, especially that Rutgers game will be a first good one, right? The red bandana game on the 25th anniversary of 9/11 should be absolutely insane atmosphere and, Power 4 competition, Big Ten coming to town against former BC quarterback Dylan Lonergan as well. That'll be a fun one, but I think by game 2, game 3, McKenzie's going to have it figured out. I think he's going to hit the ground running, like literally and figuratively. I'm so excited that he is not just a pocket passer and can really do a lot on his feet. He also has, I don't know if you guys saw his quotes in his interview at ACC Kickoff. He's got a huge chip on his shoulder. He addressed the media directly about doubts surrounding him, especially this jump from D2 to Power 4. He basically said that, people have told him his whole life that he's been too small and that he hasn't been fast enough. He says he hears what the media has said about him, which, quite frankly, hasn't been great from the stuff I've read, especially when it first came out. And right, criticism is criticism. It might have not really been directed at him, maybe more at Bill O'Brien coming off a 2-10 season and then having the solution being a Division II quarterback, right? I can see where he would get some flack, but right, regardless of who it was targeted at or who it was meant for, McKenzie says he has been paying attention to the media. He's going to be fired up. He's not, definitely not comfortable where he is. He wants to be better, and I think BC needs these hungry guys, right, to really dig us out of this hole because, right, 2-10 with a win against Fordham and then a Syracuse team that was missing their starting quarterback and also in a very similar slump. It really can't get worse than that. So we are clawing up from essentially what I would say is rock bottom here in year 3 for Bill O'Brien. So chip on his shoulder. Hopefully, he gets us going in the right direction. It's also worth noting that I think McKenzie is a great raw prospect, and we know that Bill O'Brien has a lengthy and rich history of working with or developing great quarterbacks in his career. So I got a list of 4 of them here for those who do not know. So I guess in no particular order, we can go with Tom Brady in 2011. He was Brady's position coach from 2009 to 2010. He was the OC for the Pats in 2011. Under O'Brien's direct guidance, right, Brady got that first ever unanimous MVP in 2010. During those 3 seasons together with O'Brien directly at his side, Brady threw for 13,500 yards, 103 touchdowns, and just 28 interceptions. And then that AFC championship and then the Super Bowl appearance, XLVI, right? So one of Brady's most dominant seasons was with O'Brien as his quarterback coach. And that was 16 years ago. Things do change, obviously, as we can see by looking around us, but he has that history, right? Moving on, Bryce Young, when he was at Alabama, he was the OC and quarterbacks coach from 2021 to 2022. O'Brien took over Alabama and, basically what I think he was the direct reason Bryce Young got that Heisman in 2021. Under O'Brien's play calling, I have it here. Bryce Young threw for 4,800 yards, 47 touchdowns in just 2021 alone, and then led them to that national championship game. Again, just like with Brady, O'Brien was right at his side calling all those plays. He has, he's got the pedigree, he's got the experience. I think McKenzie, could really end up in a similar situation. Maybe not on the level of Heisman or a unanimous MVP, of course, but in terms of development, I'm sure he can get a lot better. He was also with Deshaun Watson when he was the head coach of the Texans from 17 to 20. He basically oversaw Watson's transition to the NFL. That 2017 Deshaun Watson season was absolutely insane, right? Most passing touchdowns, which was 19 through a player's first 7 career games. Watson had multiple Pro Bowls under Bill O'Brien, back-to-back seasons with 25 passing tutties and 5 rushing touchdowns in 18 and 19. He really, I think, of course, with the help coming from Dabo at Clemson, but I think he really turned Deshaun Watson into one of the most dominant quarterbacks of the late 2010 era, especially for how young he was. And then one I found, I really did some digging here because I think this one applies the most to Mason McKenzie, but Matt McGloin from Penn State, right? O'Brien was the head coach and OC in 2012, kind of in charge of the Penn State resurrection. This is probably the best historical comparison for Mason McKenzie because Matt McGloin was a former walk-on who, similar to McKenzie, was really counted out and shrugged off by mainstream media. I'm sure even people in the own organization. But in 2012, under Bill O'Brien, he led the Big Ten in passing yards with 3,200. He threw 24 touchdowns and just 5 interceptions, completely changed his career, showed that O'Brien can maximize underheralded talent. That's exactly who Matt McGloin was. And I think that's really who Mason McKenzie could be. Especially because, like I said, Mason McKenzie possesses the raw tools to be great. I just think he needs someone there to guide him and develop him to becoming one of the BC great quarterbacks. And, I think it really, really lines up, and it makes a lot of sense why Bill O'Brien, kind of went for this D2 guy, right? Like, of course, he doesn't have the experience of playing against P4 competition or being in a P4 program like Wilson, but he has that raw tools, and right, we've seen it with Bill O'Brien. I think he was really enticed by that. So we'll see how that ends up. Of course, I'll be doing more BC football stuff as we get more and more info and as the season gets closer. But if I'm you guys, I would be really, really excited for Mason McKenzie. I think he's going to be a great addition. I think he's going to settle in really well, especially with O'Brien's, system and playbook. I think, he'll have the hiccups, but he'll ease in. And then, of course, the Chudzinski thing as well is definitely going to hinder him as a young quarterback. But that's all I have for now. I just wanted to hop on here and give that news, especially the Chudzinski stuff, which is horrible. And then kind of when O'Brien sent McKenzie to the ACC kickoff, that kind of has, solidified him as the starter, at least for week 1. I will say before we go, I can't stress it enough. We cannot repeat what we did with Grayson James and Dylan Lonergan last year, right? If you'll remember, we started with Lonergan kind of in the early weeks, and then we bench Lonergan for Grayson James, and then we just keep flip-flopping back and forth. When you do that, and you saw it directly last year in that season, none of the quarterbacks are getting comfortable. None of them are building confidence because they're constantly getting benched and shuffled around. None of them are finding a rhythm or a groove, especially with their receivers, because they're not starting consistently every game. And you have to go about it in a more organized manner, right? If I had the call last year, I would have started Grayson James for the first couple of weeks and then, either slowly, kind of had benched him or let Lonergan develop a little more and then let Lonergan go in. The problem is you can't put a young guy, start him at quarterback, and then immediately yank him out and then start tossing him around with, in this kind of bogus rotation that has no real rhythm. So if you're going to start McKenzie this year, you need to make sure he's the guy. And when you bench him, if you do, knock on wood you don't, if you do bench McKenzie, you better just stick with Wilson, because that jumble of, random rotations we did last year was probably why our offense was so horrible, because there was no rhythm, no groove, no chemistry, no nothing between our quarterback and any of his receiving targets and running backs. We must avoid that, right? Bottom line. That's all I have for now. Thank you for listening to the Green Line Gazette episode 27. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Substack. Of course, follow on Instagram at Green Line Gazette as well. And I will be back soon with more BC football content as the season approaches.